Morning. It's so great to see you. As Lynn mentioned, I've had the good fortune of having visited with you a few times in the past, primarily in my capacity as editorial director at the Press Democrat. And I've always enjoyed this forum, and I very much appreciate you having us here today. I just want to warn you, I just flew back from Texas yesterday, and of course our flight was delayed. I was there for my daughter's college soccer tournament, and of course the flight is delayed, right? It's Thanksgiving week, and so I didn't get in until 3:30 in the morning. So if I'm a little more incoherent than usual, you'll please have grace and appreciate the filling me up with coffee and propping me up. So really appreciate. I knew if we came, there would be good coffee and good conversation and great questions. So we hope you save your questions for the end, and we'll have a chance to talk with you. Today, our program is Ann and I are gonna talk a little bit about where this project came from, how we started getting into this, telling the story, how the book came about. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the structure. But before we go on to that, I do want to let Lauren, while you're here, I want to introduce, this is Lauren Spates. She is our contributing author and editor, without whom we never would have gotten this project done. She really pushes across the finish line. So a round of applause for Lauren, please. So I also want to recognize Beth Steffi Radas, who's in the back. Beth is actually a family member of one of the residents of Villa Capri, and she has been such a great support to us all along on this project. And we want to thank her very much. And now she's helping us with our promotion. So a round of applause for Beth as well, please. So
Beth is someone who will not quit until the laws change. We know that.
You want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So we wanted to kind of tell how this book came about, how this started from what was originally going to be an article, maybe two, into 446 pages, and how I roped Paul into this whole thing, and then Lauren. They'll never take my calls after this. So about 5 years ago, I was helping a former student named Roberta McIntyre. She was doing a story about the Tubbs fire. It was June of 2018, and she asked for my help as to just consult for free and find some people who we could interview who had incredible fire stories. Well, the one thing that came to mind first was this column I'd read by Paul. Paul and I used to work together 30-something years ago.
You don't have to put a number to
on the peninsula.
Say, well, some of you I know from Palo Alto, the old Palo Alto Times Tribune, if some of you may remember. Ann and I worked for that company years ago.
Yeah, and anyway, he had written a column about these two women who had raced up to Villa Capri in the middle of the night to rescue their family members and ended up staying and helping others and getting locked out in the process. And that story had just stuck with me. So I called Melissa Langles, one of the women, and she agreed to an interview. Now, she hadn't talked to anyone yet. And so I conducted the interview while Roberta filmed it. We were all just in tears. Melissa was obviously still traumatized by what she had been through. And she had us all crying. And then at the end of the interview, she showed me this website that Oakmont Senior Living had put out that was telling their side of the story about. Hello? Did that go out?
You're right.
Okay. And there's one question. It's going in and out, I think.
You're okay.
Okay.
I think
there's one question that said that there was a team effort. Wait, did family members evacuate all residents? And the website said there was a team effort led by staff with help from family members, which we greatly appreciated. Now, Melissa had just told me the story of being left alone with Kathy Allen and 24 residents. And so I read this aloud in front of Melissa, and she said, yeah, that's bullshit. But she was very angry. And so I started realizing that there was more to this story that hadn't been told. And so I called up Paul, and I think I connected with Beth about then as well. I called up Paul and said, hey, would you like to work on a story with me? He had since left the Press Democrat. And early on, we were able to acquire these depositions in the lawsuit that was filed before they were sealed. Now, nobody, no reporter has seen them except the three of us. Nobody has acquired them after because they were quickly sealed up. And there were thousands of pages of depositions of the employees, family members, rescuers, police. So we had this treasure trove of information. We also did CPR, public records requests for 911 calls, body cam video, social services documents, all the investigations. So we just ended up with thousands of pages of documents. But the interviews were what really drew us in, because we realized that so many different people had stories that needed to be told that hadn't been told yet. And it's been like piecing together a 10,000 piece puzzle when, you know, the dog has eaten a number of pieces and little kids, yeah, and you have no idea how many are missing. And so we're going to be telling some of those stories very shortly.
Yeah, so this is, many of you know snippets of the story. Obviously, many of you lived through this, and I know some of you lost homes in this fire, and our hearts go out to you. It was a traumatic event for all of us. But we felt this was an important story for our community. This is our community story. It's not our story. And it really begins with the heroes. And as Ann mentioned, Melissa was traumatized by what happened. Kathy Allen felt that Oakmont Senior Living was basically calling them liars. And that we felt the whole story needed to be told. So this was, as Ann said, it was our attempt to put this 10,000 piece puzzle together. And there were pieces missing, we know that, but this is our best attempt to recreate what actually happened, not just the night of the fire, but what was to come in the days to follow. So we're going to do a reading in just a minute, but I just wanted to break down and give you a sense of how the book is structured, because it begins if you think about it, in three parts. The first part is really kind of a history leading up to the development up in Fountain Grove. Some of you know the controversies about Fountain Grove Parkway and development up there. Goes into the history of the Hanley Fire. Some of you may even remember the Hanley Fire from 1964 and how it took the same course from Calistoga to Santa Rosa. But back then there was just ranches up there, as Gay LeBaron likes to tell me. There was nothing, and just a bunch of horses and a scattering ranches, and yet that was still a devastating memory for Santa Rosa. And so we went into the background of that, what we learned, what we didn't learn from the '64 fire. And then we start to introduce some of the characters that you're going to meet as part of the book at Villa Capri, Verena, and some of the heroes as well. Second part goes into a much more dramatic hour by hour account of what actually happened the night of the fire. And each chapter begins what we call a fire overview, giving you a sense of where the Tubbs fire is, where it's spreading, basically tracking the fire as it eventually surrounds Villa Capri and Verena. And then each chapter goes into what's going on or what's not going on inside Villa Capri and Verena in terms of getting the residents out. And then the third part of the story is really a long, is about the battle for accountability afterward, about once we understood what happened, trying to hold people accountable to make sure something like this never happens again. And that comes through the lawsuit, as Ann mentioned. There was a state investigation that initially wanted to ban the two executive directors of the Villa Capri and Verena, ban them for life, never work on another place. One of the harshest penalties they'd ever issued before the Department of Social Services. And then, of course, there were the criminal investigation that was launched by the district attorney, who eventually was recalled or attempted to be recalled by the owner of the Oakmont Senior Living. And so this story just kept unfolding as Ann and I ventured down this road. And we had these high volume of information and pages. We finally looked at each other one day and said, this is more than just a couple of stories. We need to put together a book proposal. So we're very grateful to our agent and for Permuted Press for the contract that we were able to put together to get this book put together. And they were patient with us. They wanted us to tell this whole story. So it's really kind of more of a five-year saga. And it's really also, it goes into more about really what are the lessons we can learn for the security and safety of our retirement complexes. And for us, we'll talk a little bit about this more later, about what are the takeaways about before you move into a retirement complex, about making sure that they have a culture of safety. So I think we're going to do a book reading now. We'll start with, and I think Ann's going to start us off.
Yeah, you are welcome to read along. I'm reading the prologue, or most of it, which starts on Roman numeral 19. It's been a while since I've studied my Roman numerals. Okay, October 9th, 2017, 3:46 a.m. Flying embers, some the size of fists, whipped through the air as two women yanked at the handles of the heavy wooden doors. They wouldn't budge. The women shouted and pounded on the window. They motioned to the elderly residents inside, pleading with them to open the doors, their fingers jabbing toward the brass handles. A propane tank exploded in the distance, punctuating the near hurricane-force winds that blunted their cries for help. The power was out inside the building, same for dim emergency lights illuminating the halls and casting a faint glow on the faces of the senior citizens lining the lobby. Most were in shock, having just been rousted from bed by strangers holding flashlights or glowing cell phones. Some wore robes or slippers, while others arrived in the lobby barefoot, with only sheets covering their near-naked bodies. No one in the hazy lobby moved to let the women inside. Kathy Allen and Melissa Langles were locked out, and some 24 elderly men and women, half in wheelchairs, half sitting on walkers, were trapped inside, incapable of helping themselves. Their home, a luxury assisted living and memory care facility in California's fabled wine country, was in the path of a titanic, fast-approaching firestorm, one that would prove to be among the most destructive and deadliest in state history. At that moment, flames were already eating away at the northeast side of the rectangular building. The women had no key or pass card to the facility. Those who did, or those who could have buzzed visitors into the opulent complex of stucco walls and red-tiled roofs, had long since fled in vans or personal cars packed with other residents, or had never shown up at all. Kathy and Melissa, who'd only just met, were neither employees nor first responders. Besides having a family member who lived at Villa Capri Assisted Living and Memory Care, the only thing they had in common was the paralyzing conviction that no one was coming to help. They were on their own. Kathy and Melissa peered inside at the elderly faces. 14 were residents of the memory care unit, having been admitted with varying degrees of Alzheimer's disease or some other form of dementia. One set of eyes staring back belonged to outspoken 91-year-old Henrietta Hillman, the self-described queen of Villa Capri for much of the past decade. Sitting near Henrietta was Alice Eurotis, a former legal secretary who resided in one of the few low-income rooms at Villa Capri, a place she navigated by walker and fondly called my castle. Nearby in a wheelchair sat Louise Johnson, a former musician and local landscape artist and a lifelong asthmatic. Diagnosed with advanced dementia, the mother of four lived behind secured doors in Villa Capri's Traditions Memory Care Center. Kathy and Melissa knew knew these people were not the only ones locked inside. Upstairs, still positioned on the second floor landing overlooking the lobby, was the blind and nearly deaf Bess Boudreaux, who had wailed when strangers carried her out of her room. Nearby Bess was Virginia Gunn, Melissa's mother, paralyzed on her left side, unable to roll over in bed without help, who was now seated in her wheelchair. Melissa had wanted to get her mother out right away when she arrived an hour and a half earlier, but Virginia insisted her daughter take care of others first. "I'll be all right," Virginia assured her. 4 additional residents waited in wheelchairs on the landing beside Virginia and Bess as the temperature rose and emergency lights could no longer cut through the heavy gray haze. But without electricity or backup power, Villa Capri's elevator was out of commission, leaving the 6 elderly residents with no way down unless they were carried, giving Kathy's recent back surgery and Melissa's recent hip replacement, that was nearly impossible. Outside, the smoke thickened and embers grew more frequent, flung into the air as if by bellows pumping 70-mile-per-hour winds. In desperation, Kathy flipped over a flashlight and used its butt end to strike a blow at the window pane. Nothing happened. Again, she rammed it into the glass, this time with greater force. Nothing, not even a crack. Even if Kathy and Melissa could get back inside, they had but a single car between them. A bus large enough to carry all the remaining residents sat locked in the parking lot, but no one, not even the frightened Villa Capri employees they encountered earlier in the evening, knew where to find its keys. Kathy and Melissa were running out of options and time. The firestorm would soon surround them on 3 sides. Even the driveway marking their exit to Fountain Grove Parkway appeared to be on fire. The blaze was so intense that the slivers of grass in the median and the trees and shrubbery on each side of the road were aflame. Villa Capri had promised around-the-clock care for as much as $12,000 a month, but in the darkness foisted upon them by the power outage, its residents were trapped, and their castle, known for its fine china, chandeliers, and elegant furnishings, had transformed from a palatial complex that pledged to care for them to one threatening to entomb them. In the past 6 hours, the Tubbs fire had already claimed more than a dozen lives and consumed thousands of homes, shops, offices, hotels, and historic structures within a 9-mile radius of Villa Capri and its sister complex, Verena. The bulk of the residents from the surrounding Tony Fountain Grove neighborhood had already fled their multi-million-dollar homes. Villa Capri's tabletop perch, a broad shelf of land cut into the hillside above Fountain Grove Parkway, typically afforded views across the Santa Rosa basin, but smoke shrouded the expanse, so Kathy and Melissa could see little of the devastation smoldering beyond the burning shrubs and hillside grapevines abutting the complex. And there was no sign of emergency vehicles coming to help.
As Kathy and Melissa stood stymied, a brown GMC Sierra pickup pulled into the narrow shared driveway and raced past Villa Capri toward the entrance of the larger but equally opulent Verena, located just a few hundred feet to the northwest. Behind the wheel was Petaluma welder R.J. Kissling, who, encouraged by his sister, had come to check on their grandfather. Verena was dark, with just a few vehicles in the lot, and R.J. was relieved. It bolstered the assurance he offered his sister an hour earlier, a conviction shared that night by many family members and friends of Verena and Villa Capri residents. Quote, certainly they would have found a way to get everybody out by now. RJ called his sister back to tell her he had arrived and the place looked empty. Are you sure? She challenged him. Go check Papa's apartment. RJ did as she pleaded, exiting his truck, pulling on his headlamp, and stepping into Verena's sweeping foyer. Normally during his arrival, RJ was struck by a sense of opulence thanks to the lavish decor. The building's romantic Italian aesthetic was not one he favored, but he knew Papa and the other residents appreciated it. This time, however, it wasn't the grand setting that grabbed RJ's attention. It was the faces. Beyond the double doors, Verena's dark and smoke-filled lobby was packed with residents, some sitting on chairs or benches, others perched on couches and walkers. It was just about 3:45 in the morning when one gentleman rose from a chair near the cafe and approached RJ. "Are you the firefighters?" he asked calmly. "Are you here to rescue us?"
RJ was just at our book launch party and told part of his story, and it was very clear that he is still deeply affected 5 years later.
RJ is one of these characters in the book that I love. He's one of my favorites. He's the kind of guy that if you're ever in a bind, he's going to be there to help you out. We have a chapter earlier on about how he went to the Russian River with his wife on Mother's Day, and he ended up saving like 3 kids who were drowning in a swollen river that day. He's just that kind of guy. He helped, I think, I'm not sure we included it, but he helped save the life of a surfer in the South and down in San Diego area because he happened to have a knife on him and dove in and helped cut the kelp that had wrapped him up, and he nearly died. Anyway, the book is rich with characters like that, and
who are real people.
Who are real people
living in our community.
And they still have nightmares about what happened that night. I mean, our experience, this is really why we wrote the story. We wanted the heroes to be recognized, that there was a lot of disinformation, misinformation, and just outright lies that came out afterward that did not give these people the honor that they really deserved. And it's really a story about people, what drives somebody to step up in a moment and do the right thing, to go around the barricades, to stay and help somebody who's in many cases a complete stranger. And yet there were others who abandoned their responsibilities and their charges and went the other way. And to me, that's really what really drove us to write the story. We wanted that recognition. We wanted that story to get out. So I have another section I wanted to read to you. I don't know if we have time, but there's a section in the Verena area that we wanted you to know that one of the challenges there were the alarms did go off at Verena, but the executive director told his staff to shut them off because he didn't know what was going on. He had no idea there was a fire. He apparently wasn't checking his phone or anything. And when residents came out because they smelled smoke or heard the alarms, they were constantly sending them back. But I do want to read one section to you, and it concerns Bill Gallagher, who I know some of you know deeply, and I just want to mention because he obviously had a key role in this area. And part of our story is really focusing on this man of 2 personas. I mean, he's been very generous in his benevolence in this community in many key ways, but we have also seen that other side of him. And I just want to read a small portion, and this is in chapter 17, page 269, if those of you are following along. It says, perhaps the best example of Gallagher's dichotomous public persona was on display in 2009. That spring, budget cuts had placed the Santa Rosa High School woodshop program on the verge of elimination. One April day, as 70 students protested the cuts to passersby on the front lawn of the city's iconic high school, the set for several Hollywood movies, including Peggy Sue Got Married, the principal received a call on behalf of the Gallaghers, offering to donate $85,000 to keep the program alive. I'm floating, said Santa Rosa Board President Donna Jay in a newspaper story the following day. She described it as a community member stepping forward in a time of need. It's wonderful. I went to Santa Rosa High and I took woodshop, Bill Gallagher told the Press Democrat at the time. It was the class that saved me. I was a terrible student. I don't know how many classes that I missed in my senior year, but I made woodshop every day and I loved it. And then and then it says a couple pages later, within a few months of the Gallaghers saving the woodshop program at Santa Rosa High, the community would see another side to the family man and community benefactor. Locals bore witness to the resentment and provocation of a developer whose views on housing development were clashing with a region that had taken an abrupt shift at the end of the 20th century away from the sprawl-inducing land use practices that had dominated much of California for generations. In short, Gallagher's hometown was changing, and it was no longer as welcoming to his projects as it once was. Sonoma County voters demanded policies that protected open space areas, provided green buffers between developed communities, and prevented developments on ridgelines and watersheds in favor of city-centered, transit-oriented development. And they were electing public officials who would pledge to defend those policies. On top of that, the Great Recession had taken its toll on the North Bay, as it had on the rest of the nation, with its deepest impacts felt in the housing and development sectors. However, in July 2009, when Gallagher laid off 7 of 18 employees at Oakmont Senior Living, he didn't blame the economy. He blamed the city. Quote, "I held off laying people off as long as I could," Gallagher told the Press Democrat. "It's directly related to the projects in Santa Rosa." In particular, he criticized city planners who were holding up approval of 2 of his planned housing developments. One was the 142-unit Fountain Grove Lodge project he had first proposed 5 years earlier for a site down the hill from the recently opened Verena campus. The other was a larger 200-unit El Noca Village condominium complex near the retirement community of Oakmont, a project that had been in planning for more than 4 years. "We're tired of it," Gallagher said. "We're tired of being kicked in the teeth." By then, Gallagher had built nearly 1,000 homes in Sonoma County, including 650 houses for senior citizens in eastern Santa Rosa's Oakmont neighborhood and in Windsor. In addition, Aegis Assisted Living was operating nearly 36 senior care facilities in California, Washington, and Nevada. But Gallagher was having misgivings about Sonoma County. "I really made a tactical business error when I bought so much property around here," Gallagher told the Press Democrat in 2009. Despite the setbacks, he made clear that he was committed to finishing what he had set out to do. "I'm too ornery to give up," he said. "They've met their match with me." And that just sort of sets the stage for what comes later on, in that struggle for accountability and truth about what happened in this case. So, yeah.
Or should I do this one page?
Why don't you just do, why don't you
Okay.
just, and then we'll take
We're
questions.
gonna do
in just
one
a second.
quick reading, which
Oh.
is gonna lead into, some
Oh,
of the questions.
Okay.
This is after the fire. One of the family members, Vivian Flowers, her mother was in memory care. And so it's short here. Vivian Flowers, after hurriedly trying to replace her mother's teeth, glasses, and prescription drugs, had spent 2 nights comforting Viola as she cried about her lost belongings and worried about her Villa Capri friends. It was such chaos that when she closed her eyes, her subconscious would bring it back, Vivian said. 2 days later, on October 11th, an Oakmont corporate employee called Vivian to follow up. The employee told her everyone had evacuated Villa Capri safely, that they were in Pleasanton, and that her mother, Viola, was doing fine. Vivian decided to play along. "Really?" she said. "Yes," the Oakmont employee confirmed, "and everybody is doing fine." "That's a surprise," Vivian responded, "because my mom is sitting right here next to me." There was a slight pause on the line. "Thank God she's safe," the woman said. Vivian hung up on her. "I was pissed," she said, still incredulous as she recalled that exchange years later. They didn't know 2 days later where everyone was. Ruth Callan's daughter had a similar experience. An Oakmont employee working from Escondido, California, phoned Ruthie Kerpinski to find out how her mother was doing in Concord. "My mom is not in Concord," Ruthie told the man, who went silent, but sounded as if he was typing furiously. "They didn't know where everyone was," Ruthie said. The person Ruthie really wanted to hear from was Villa Capri Marketing Director Roberta Murray, whom Ruthie had called several times on October 9th. Roberta finally called back 2 days later. "Why didn't somebody call me?" Ruthie asked her. "Why wasn't I called?" Roberta answered vaguely, Ruthie said, saying something about Debbie Smith, the executive director, trying to get to Villa Capri. "Roberta, I used to run a supported living home for someone who was disabled," Ruthie told her. "Someone was always in charge." "Who was in charge?" Roberta replied that they had a problem with staff leaving. And that leads into one of our takeaways from the book, which the Villa Capri staff got a bad rap. They got accused of abandonment. But they all left. They all actually left with
Not all.
residents
No.
in their charge at Villa Capri. Yeah, the 4 staff members. There were 3 caregivers who we interviewed extensively for the book. The med tech who was in charge actually left first and probably should not have. This is what happens when there is no emergency plan and when people aren't trained to an emergency plan.
So one thing we wanted to emphasize is that there is a big distinction between Oakmont Senior Living, which is the name of the company that owns Villa Capri and Verena, and that was owned and started by Bill Gallagher, who also built many of the homes here, but that's not associated with Oakmont here. And many of you are familiar with Gallagher because of that and because of his El Noca project just up the road, which there was a lot of concern about that, particularly after the fires because of the problems and getting, the traffic jams we had in our area. We wanted to emphasize that. And the only other thing I wanted to mention is that there were a lot of questions that people had after what happened at Villa Capri and Verena, like how come nobody could find the keys to the big shuttle buses they had in the garage, in the driveway? Why weren't those able to use? How was Oakmont Senior Living able to get backhoes up there and clear the site of Villa Capri at a time when National Guardsmen were and barricades were up and nobody was even up to know whether or not their house had burned down? They were somehow able to get backhoes and clear the site even before they were sure all the residents were safe, as we indicated. And why were family members told, oh yeah, you'd be able to sift through the ashes for those heirlooms that so many people were able to find after the fires, and yet they were denied that opportunity, and Oakmont basically turned them away on that. There were just many questions that followed, and our book seeks to help address and answer many of those questions. Speaking of questions, we got to get the question. And I'm sorry that we went on long, but we want to.
We would love to answer any of your questions.
Actually, you did not go on long. We often have the speakers speak until about 11:30.
Oh, great.
So
okay.
Oh, well, we could keep going.
If you wish, or we can open up to questions, whatever.
Yeah,
you
I mean, we
prefer.
had more that we were planning to do. We thought we had to get to questions.
Why don't you
Well,
continue?
Okay.
Okay. Well, as Ann was mentioning, we felt there was a lot of the staff was used as a target for that the staff abandoned. An argument is there were some staff that did leave, but there were also some key individuals that we highlight in the book who did and really helped to do what they could to help the residents, both at Villa Capri and Verena, and we really identify them. We feel that they were abandoned by managers and the management, not just the night of the fires, like the executive director of the Villa Capri never even showed up. She called the staff, said, I'm on my way, never showed up and never explained why. We still don't know where she was for 6 hours, even amidst all the depositions and everything. But that there really was a strong effort by some of the staff members, but they were abandoned that night. They were abandoned in their training. They were never properly trained. They never were properly supported. They apparently, Oakmont claims to have had an evacuation plan, but apparently it was in a binder in an office behind a locked door, and it burned up. And they could never produce it afterward, which we found very curious.
Yeah, and it all comes down to, with any business, with any with a school, with a senior care facility, is there a culture of safety? And in this case, there wasn't, and that leads to a lack of training, a lack of planning, and that one of the med tech in charge later said she knew there was a plan, a binder, but she didn't even think to look at it. And the caregivers on staff weren't trained to know, and they didn't, I just want to correct one thing. They didn't have an evacuation plan. They had an emergency plan, but they were getting around to coming up with an evacuation plan.
Thank you.
So there were no fire drills, nothing in which the residents were involved either, to learn how to, what to do in an emergency.
And that was the real challenge up at Verena as well, because as I said, the alarms went off, residents were smelling smoke, and the executive director kept telling them, go back to your rooms and wait for instruction. Well, they never got instruction. The next thing they know, RJ Kissling is banging on their door saying, "You got to get out. There's a fire surrounding the ridge." And by then there was a mad scramble to get them off. And the book goes into detail about really how perilous that situation was up there. And we quoted we were able to talk to a number of the firefighters who went up there and really fought those fires to save those residents. So it wasn't just civilians, but really some first responders did some heroic work, and they were never recognized for what actually happened up there. So one of the questions was, and Beth has really been instrumental in this and in trying to push for some legislative reform, just to make sure, something like this never happens again. When the Titanic went down, it revolutionized maritime law, right? It changed how we built and all the safety. Well, we really haven't seen that in this case. There was a bill that was passed in the Assembly, AB 3098, by Assembly Member Laura Friedman from Burbank. And there was a lot of some what looked like good things. That there was some reforms. There was a require retirement complex, assisted living complexes to have evacuation plans. They were supposed to have chair lifts to help residents down from second floors. But there were a number of things that were included in there, and it passed very quickly. But it was largely written by the retirement community lobby. They in cases like this, where there's been a dramatic public relations failure like this, they get out in front of it. So they help write legislation that makes it look like it's really addressing the problem. But it really was smoke and mirrors. That was the lobby for assisted living reform basically said it was smoke and mirrors. It required a plan, but didn't require specific training, or if they had training, they didn't require that residents be included. It said they should have a transportation plan, which stronger legislation would have required them to contract with a bus company or somebody ahead of time, which some companies have done, but it didn't require any of that. And so it passed easily without any opposition. But sometimes when something passes easily without opposition, you wonder, well, why? Why was the lobby willing to go along with this? And that's because it really, like I said, was smoke and mirrors. State Senator Dodd did come up with a bill in 2019, SB 314, which included abandonment in the list of offensive eligible for enhanced civil penalties and civil trials, so that, if there are cases of abandonment, their cabinet violators could be required to pay up to $250,000. That was a great thing. That was certainly helpful, but it didn't really get into the regulation area that we were hoping for. And in fact, I think Beth, you was quoted in Senator Dodd's press release when that bill passed, and she was invited to come up to the Sacramento to testify, but that passed so quickly. The governor signed it. They didn't really have time to need for a hearing. So
can I ask, how many of you have had to leave your homes or evacuate during a fire here? How many more than once? More than twice? Wow. 3 times.
Probably
Wow.
for tubs, glass, maybe nuns.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So
Yeah.
so this book will hit home, and parts may be tough to relive.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to point out is there's a KQED study that found 35% of senior care, of the 10,000 senior care facilities in California, were built either in wildlife, urban interface zones, or in extreme fire hazard zones. And so what Paul's going to tell you about is how we kind of need to rethink where we build these places. I mean, Villa Capri was built in Verena in the footprint of the Hanley fire, which tore through there 50 some years earlier.
Yeah, it's many of these complexes are great, but we recognize that they are built in beautiful. They're built on ridges. They're built surrounded by woods. They're beautiful settings. But our argument is, given the increase numbers of these frequency of these catastrophic events, be they wildfires or hurricanes or tornadoes, that more often than not, it's our seniors who are left in harm's way and often rank among the highest numbers of our casualties. We saw it with the Maui fire. 65% of the victims there were over the age 65 or older. The campfire, it was like 80%. 75% of the victims in the campfire that just swept through there. Our argument is, look, we need to rethink this. And if we're going to have these places in some of these vulnerable areas, that we need to make sure they have the resources, the training, the planning, and the staff so that in place, so that when these events do happen, they can respond quickly. And if I could make one more point about the legislation, one point that we still feel that is needed in California is a requirement that if you're going to be a retirement complex, especially assisted living, and you have residents in wheelchairs on the second floor, that you should be required to have a generator to operate your elevators, right? That was a huge issue with this fire. And Florida, just a month before the Tubbs fire, 12 senior citizens in Florida died due to the sweltering conditions that followed in the wake of Hurricane Irma. And that was directly a result of the fact that their power went out and 12 seniors died. And Florida ended up passing a law that required generators for nursing homes for that kind of a situation. California doesn't have it. Beth has actually helped write some draft legislation, and so far there's been a lot of resistance to that.
Some of our experts said even if the laws are on the books, it's also about enforcement. And California does not have a good track record of enforcing the laws that are on the books already.
Yeah. So again, our feeling is this is not just about the Tubbs fire. It's not just about Sonoma County, that this is really a cautionary case study of what's happening in many places across our country, and that we need to rethink about how we address these issues and how we make sure that people are in safe conditions. So one of the things we often talk about are, what are the takeaways about if you or a loved one are moving into a retirement complex? What are some of the things that we should be mindful of in asking before you move in? Because some of these places, they all have nice chandeliers, beautiful views, fancy dining rooms, but how do you get behind the scenes and really find out whether they have a safety culture, as we call it? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, because while this happened, in a wildfire right nearby, we've seen the last few years intensifying floods, hurricanes, tornadoes. It's like every new storm or disaster is breaking records, freezes and heat domes and all of that. So this, really the lessons in here can hopefully go across the country. We advise to look beyond the posh accommodations and the list of activities and the yoga and the Tai Chi and all these great things. What you want to look at, one, is staff turnover rates. Now, in this industry, staff turnover is high throughout, but if employees are treated badly, you're going to have higher staff turnover. If they're not paid well, you're going to have higher staff turnover. If they're overworked or there's a dysfunctional environment. In the year and a half before the fire at Villa Capri, they had incredibly high turnover rates. The memory care director, it was the third in 2017 alone. It turned over that fast. And those people themselves, the managers, don't have time to get trained. So high turnover. No one likes if their favorite caregiver or favorite chef or favorite employee is gone one week and then they get to know someone else and then they're gone the next. I think it's important to ask to see the emergency plan. Is there an evacuation plan? It's that. And how detailed is it? Have they contracted with a bus company? In the book, you'll see what happened at Brookdale Shenate, less than a mile away, how they called up their bus company first thing and asked for the smaller buses that would be easier for residents to get onto, easier to navigate. If there's multiple floors, how do they get people down the stairs? And are the staff trained? At Villa Capri, they'd been given a handout. They had never practiced this 2-person carry of getting people down the stairs. Now I believe they have stair chairs, but they didn't at that time. And how do they train the night staff? Is there a manager at night? Are the night staff trained at night, or like at Villa Capri, were they required to come in at 2 in the afternoon when they would normally be sleeping, or have other day jobs, which many of these staff were working all night and then had jobs during the day. And then how are the management? Are the management trained to race up there? At Brookdale, Monique Dixon had told her managers, if there's a police barricade, blow through it and take the ticket.
Go around. Yeah.
Yeah. Just let them chase you. Let them give you a ticket, but get here.
We had executive directors or high-ranking people say, "Oh, I couldn't get up there because a volunteer in a vest said, it had already been evacuated or whatever," and they turned around and left. And it's like, well, yeah. So anyway, we don't need to go to that. But I do want to say, if I could just interject real quickly.
There was just one more last point that I want to make, and that is that online, every senior care facility, they're inspected. There's data through the continuing care community website, and you can see what kinds of violations a place might have received. You want to look for critical violations, like of course there's going to be little violations here and there, but do they have a track record of critical violations? That's something really important to pay attention to.
And one thing we do want to say is that the Villa Capri and Verena have completely changed. I mean, it's a much more safer environment now, from what we understand. So if you have friends or you live there, we're not saying it's unsafe. Some of that culture has changed because of the state mandate, court mandates, settlement with the district attorney. There's a lot of things that have helped change. But, there are, as we say, this is kind of a cautionary case study for many of these facilities as we go. And this is a burgeoning industry. I mean, the assisted care living industry alone is a $76 billion industry. And with 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day, it's going to get more. Some of these places are cash cows. And I don't mean to scare you, but it's important to look behind all the fancy furnishings and the good food to really know what's going on there and what the reputation is. So we want to help you do that. Okay?
Yeah, questions?
Thank you, Lynn.
Wonderful talk. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I'd like to ask the first question, which is, how did you go about writing this book? Did you focus on Villa Capri, and you focused on Verena, or was it one chapter? And
no, I focused on Villa Capri. Paul focused on Verena, and Lauren helped merge the two.
Played referee at times. So.
Yes. So that's how we did it. And then part 3, we kind of just divided up different areas.
I think coming from a newspaper background, we're sort of used to working collaboratively on stories like this and used to editing each other. And I think that really helped. So.
Hi, I did not get to sleep until 4 o'clock this morning, and it's your fault because I started reading your book. I could not put it down. It is riveting. Even though you know how it ends, I couldn't put it down. It's an amazing book. I bought 3 for people, for friends. It's an amazing book.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've been accused of keeping a few people up at night, and
now Paul has nothing to complain about because he only stayed up till 3:30.
That's right. Yeah.
I wonder if you could comment on what the outcome was with the legal issues and the lawsuits that went on.
Well, one thing that's interesting is this book is the first time that the details of the lawsuit and the investigations have really seen the light of day. The lawsuit, the attorney and elder rights attorney, Catherine Stebner, took on the lawsuit on behalf of Kathy and Mark Allen and Melissa Langles and several residents' families, and they ended up settling. And that's why I think Oakmont Senior Living did not want a court case in which all the details of what happened came to light. And they ended up settling other cases and investigations as well.
Each step of the way, you see a pattern where the Oakmont Senior Living would lawyer up and really challenge and press, but then just before trial or just before the state case went to an ALJ, administrative law judge, they settled, they agreed, and then they did whatever they could to seal what was happening, because they didn't want a public airing of what actually happened. And this is why we felt this was an important story, because in many ways, this is the public airing, the public trial that never happened.
A lot of us who live here have been watching El Noca, and we see the direct analogy with the Hanley fire. There are wonderful pictures of El Noca being fully inflamed in the glass fire. But the current rules and laws in California, which seek to have more housing built, more affordable housing built, okay, seem to be pushing that El Noca must be built. How can that be stopped?
That's a really good question, because you're exactly right. There is a lot of pressure coming from the state because we're behind in creating enough housing for the next generation of Californians, for our people who can live and work here, especially lower income housing. At the same time, that we often look to the areas that are most vulnerable or where there's already traffic issues. And how do you then put on the overlay of the risk of catastrophic events, and how do you deal with that? And that's why, you know, I know your community has been very outspoken in giving feedback concerning the El Noca project and other projects, and I just think that's so important. And the SDC is Summit Developmental Center Future. There's a lot of housing going in there. I think there's a lot of good analysis going into addressing that exact question, making sure that if you're going to add housing, that our routes are safe and that we're not going to face the traffic jams that we all faced. I know I faced three times getting out of my neighborhood just down at Skyhawk. Yes.
Talking about governmental involvement, the cost of the pricing for many of these homes is getting almost astronomical. And as you add more of these demands to them, it's going to raise the prices even more. What do you think the government's responsibility is to try to make, because we are an increasing demographic, what do you think the government's responsibility is in trying to meet these demands in the future? Or do you have an opinion on it?
Well, I have to be careful. I am communications manager now for the county of Sonoma, but this project was, you know, I need to make clear, we worked on holidays, weekends, sometimes early mornings, nights. So this is separate from my role at the county. But I will put on that hat for a minute and just say, absolutely, government, we understand that those pressures are there. And we went through this with our housing element that was just approved for the county. And these are really difficult issues that we're getting down to, is where we're going to put these new housing developments that can be kept affordable, while at the same time making sure they have the regulation, the restrictions to make sure that they're safe and that they're safe for the neighbors as well. And again, I don't have a magic wand that's going to answer those, but I think there's a deep respect for the challenges and the importance of making really careful decisions about where, when, how these things are built.
I would just add to that wherever they're built, they need to be safe. I mean, it's important that they're safe. They don't need to be over-regulated. We're not asking for, and Beth isn't asking for over-regulation. Having emergency plans and an evacuation plan, and trained staff. If you're paying staff, if you're paying a facility to take care of you around the clock, then that includes in an emergency. So I think, without over-regulating, we need to make sure that every place is prepared.
Let me give an example. We were talking earlier, is it George? George and I were talking earlier about, some of of people that were having a hard time opening their garage door when the power was out, right? We know of a number of people at Campfire, Maui, in Tubbs as well, unfortunately, who perished because they couldn't raise their garage door. So now there's like, well, can we require that there be an easier way or a battery backup for garage door openers? I want to point out that both at Villa Capri and Verena, they had the same, well, certainly Verena, they had the same issue of not being able to raise the garage door. Number of cases we note in here are people went to manually try to raise the garage door, and they couldn't get it up all the way, and they only got it up high enough for embers to start spreading in and starting fires inside. So, and they were pouring smoke in, so they decided to close it and figure something else out. That's why some people who had cars couldn't get out of Verena. And it just seems, we never really got to understand why Verena didn't have properly manual openings for their garages. But that's just an example of, something that's not necessarily going to create a lot of cost, but is certainly an important safety measure.
They need your keys.
For what?
More books.
Oh, we need to go. Okay, yeah, I'll get those. We're running out of books. What a nice problem to have. I have an extra box in my car. I'll get them.
Yes, go ahead.
After seeing what happened in Maui, which was catastrophic in every way you could look at it, from communications to warnings to traffic, where
Yeah.
people were burned in their cars. I don't think Mr. Gallagher is the issue as much as it is the state and the city's oversight on allowing it in Anoka, 700 units, the development center, 900 units, Sutter Hospital on Chenate with another 400 or 500, and no plans whatever. We're on a lousy road on 12. Arnold Road is even worse. And I don't see anybody raising hell or saying, what about, how are we going to get out? There were no cops out here on directing traffic at anywhere along on 12 anytime that we were allowed out. And people that were on the highway weren't going to let us get out of there until you Buffalo Joy in.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of blame to go elsewhere, more macro than micro.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a community problem. I was driving down this road during the glass fire, reporting with a student of mine. And I saw those conditions on the fire on both sides. And I mean, it's terrifying. And there weren't any police guiding anyone, or, you're kind of on your own. What we saw in Maui is the police didn't know what to do. And people were on their own. And when they did what the police said, some of them were dying in their cars, just like Paradise. We've seen that the lessons from our wine country fires did not transfer to Paradise, and they certainly didn't transfer to Maui either. And one of the things we're hoping this book inspires is community conversations about just what you're talking about. How do we get out? I know my neighborhood has come together with a Map Your Neighborhood group. And we know where we have maps, we know who has propane tanks and how do you shut off the gas and who has which pets at which house. And at some point, you know, at some level, it starts with the people right around you. But you're right, there has to be oversight, and there has to be pressure for that oversight, because having a safe evacuation route is critical.
And it also, if I could add, it also is important we have improved our communications plans for the county. Again, I'm putting on my hat, but I also understand that how frustrating it was when both times coming out of Tubbs, well, certainly coming out of Tubbs, coming to Highway 12, you're not sure which way to turn, right? You didn't know, do I go left or which way is safety? And it really wasn't clear if it wasn't for KSRO and Pat Kerrigan and their team really telling us. And so I think we've gotten better about that. This was a cautionary case study for all of us, but it raises important questions for the future, because as we know, these events, we were lucky this fire season, thank the Lord. But 8 of the 10 deadliest and most destructive fires in California history have all happened in the last 4 years. 8 of the 10 most destructive in the California's history. And so we need to be better prepared about how we can address these issues. And I completely agree with you.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for this discussion. It's very interesting. I'd like to take a step back, though. You kind of left us hanging, those of us who weren't here. The people in Villa Capri and Verena that you mentioned, did everyone get out safely?
Did we give?
Well, we want you to buy the book.
No.
I'll do
No,
that.
that's
What
mean. That's mean.
Here's what we will say is that the evacuation was so botched that it greatly affected every resident who got out, and 4 people died within 10 weeks. And their families believe that it was directly related to what they went through that night. Yeah.
Our argument is that the Tubbs fire death toll was 22, which made it the 3rd deadliest fire in the state history. Our argument, it really should have been at least 26. You know, not to get too much into this, but the Camp Fire, you know, they were adding to their death toll 18 months after the fire. You know, we basically stopped at 1 week, and our argument is there were a number of people that were physically, emotionally, mentally traumatized by this particularly botched evacuation. And that then the family members are absolutely convinced that, you know, their loved ones died because of the fire. So then that goes to, you know, the Oakmont Senior Living was basically saying, oh, everything worked out fine, everybody got out okay, mistakes were made. Well, they didn't even acknowledge that at least the outset, but they eventually they were forced to acknowledge that they had abandoned seniors, but they always claimed that everybody was fine. Well, that was not the case, that the individual, even the ones who survived, have been traumatized. I mean, RJ Kissling, who's tough as nails, as I said, this guy is amazing. But I talked to him the other night, and he was tearing up because he was realizing for the first time what was happening at Villa Capri while he was going to Verena. And he feels guilty that he didn't help at Villa Capri. And I'm like, you know, first of all, you can't be in 2 places at once. And I was telling him, piecing together our puzzle and letting RJ know that, yes, when you drove up to Verena, there was already help underway. They had residents there trying to do what they can to help the residents, Kathy and Melissa, but there was nobody at Verena. You were in the right place at the right time. You know, he's a religious guy. I said, God has you in the right place. You know, that was, and I you know, he gave me a big hug, but we're still trying to help. You know, we want to acknowledge what happened, what these individuals did, the courage that they demonstrated, because we think it's really remarkable, and that is a wonderful story.
I'd like to return just for a second to the garage door problem. If there's a fire or something and a person cannot open the garage door because power is out, in that event, a lot of people depend on a company that's advertised in the Oakmont News, almost every issue, called LiftMaster, and it says it works every time. Well, the experience of many people, myself included, tells me that that's not true at all.
Oh, is
And,
that?
yeah, and I've been through this with the installer and the manufacturer as well. You can depend on it probably for 24 hours. And maybe you can open it once or so before that. But if evacuation comes on the second day or so, and you've used it once or twice,
Or it
Yeah.
wears down. It's a
You-
battery
y-
backup.
you can forget it. It
Yeah.
won't work.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
And that happens. I mean, we were evacuated in the Tubbs fire. I went down to the newspaper where I spent the night in my office for 5 nights. And then we were allowed to return home in our Skyhawk neighborhood on that Friday night, I think. And then the next morning, nuns flared up and started moving north, and they evacuated us again. So yeah, I mean, our gas was working, but our power wasn't, and our garage door certainly, even if it had a battery backup, would not have helped us that second time around. That's a good point.
So Matt, who runs MYN, Meet Your Neighbors, the emergency preparedness program here in Oakmont, has a comment. And then we'll have one final question.
Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to know how many of you are in an active Meet Your Neighbors program. Okay, so maybe half. And how many in that neighborhood don't drive? How many know your neighbors who don't drive?
Yeah.
Okay, these are the vulnerable people, the people in the wheelchair on the second floor who can't get down. So I would encourage you, those of you who are not in an active program, to get in one, to make one. And Katie Carroll and I are happy to help you set up a program, number one. And number two, for those of you that are in one, get as active as you can. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
And our final question of the day.
Hi, I moved up here from Long Beach, and we were 6 miles from the ocean, and there's 500,000 people there. I knew that the only way I could evacuate was to go to the ocean. Fortunately, I knew somebody had a boat. So I moved up here, this beautiful place, and with all you beautiful people, and I cry. My daughter's house burned down at the Tubbs fire, all their friends. And I just want to say that all this building going on here on the highway scares me to death. I knew we kind of had a chance. I've been evacuated twice. I've only been here 3 years. I'm just saying, no one's talking about it. And I don't think you vote this in. I just think it happens. And I don't understand it. And I can't thank the Map Your Neighborhood people. We are just so lucky that we live in a place where people care about all this. But you know, do you notice, because everywhere you lived in your whole life, when they build big developments, there's never the roads that never match it, ever. And here's another example right here, a 2-lane highway for all these people, even the one down here on Calistoga, 99 apartments times 2 people, maybe 200 people. And then you got the cars on top of all that.
Yeah.
And then they talk about the buses, and then you have the electric cars and electric buses. Do you think buses are going to come up there and pick up all those people? I mean, really? I mean, I don't mean to be so emotional. I usually have a little more control, but I'm telling you, I'm just scared to death now, you know?
Yeah.
Well,
We agree with
I
you.
do encourage you to keep the conversation going, you know, I mean, I'm always encouraging you to write letters to the editor, you know, come to meetings, you know, go to those public meetings, remind them that, you know, we've had our share of experiences on this side of town on fires and evacuation. We know how long it takes in an emergency to even get to Calistoga Road, let alone, you know, what's going to happen after that with all those residents there.
So we thank you, Paul and Anne.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for writing your book and exposing